A burning body was found, so badly damaged that no one could tell who she was. There was no name, no history, no trace of the life she once lived. Her face was gone, her ears burned away, and even her fingers and toes had been cut off, every mark of identity destroyed. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase her from existence. But in the world of forensics, even silence leaves clues. The body always tells its story. Every wound reveals a hint of what happened, and every scar whispers the truth. In this case, the remains of one young woman would become the key to uncovering a mystery and bringing her killer to light. Let's dive into today's story. Stonington, Connecticut, is the kind of place that feels untouched by time. Quiet hills rolling into the horizon, thick forests hugging narrow roads, and clusters of small homes scattered across the countryside. At night, those roads turn pitch black, winding through stretches of farmland and woods where even the moonlight struggles to reach. It was along one of these lonely roads that something unusual caught a driver's eye one evening. In the distance, a glow flickered against the darkness, flames rising into the night sky. At first, it looked like a small brush fire. The driver pulled over and called for help, just as a local fire chief arrived on the scene. Together, they rushed toward the blaze. But as the chief aimed his extinguisher, his stomach dropped. This wasn't just a fire. It was a body. He immediately adjusted his approach, careful not to destroy what little evidence might remain. Soon, police arrived and sealed off the area. State troopers combed through the scene, documenting everything, every footprint, every object, every angle. Nothing could be overlooked. The remains had been wrapped tightly in plastic, blankets, and duct tape. This wasn't where the victim had died. It was a dumping ground. Whoever left her there wanted her to vanish completely, to make sure no one could ever know who she was. The state medical examiner, a veteran forensic pathologist with decades of experience, was called in to take charge. The body, still wrapped, was transported carefully to the lab. Each layer was removed one by one, every movement slow and deliberate, to preserve whatever evidence might survive. What they uncovered was horrific. The victim was a young woman, likely in her 20s. Her face was gone, her features destroyed. Parts of her body had been deliberately removed. It was clear someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase her identity. Without fingers, fingerprints were useless. Without toes or personal items, even the smallest clues, a ring, a tattoo, had been taken away. But despite the effort to hide her, her body still told a story. The burn patterns revealed something crucial. Her front was far more charred than her back. That meant she'd been lying face up when the fire began. The ground had shielded part of her body, leaving patches of unburned skin, a small but vital piece of evidence in a mystery that was only beginning. As investigators examined the body, they found one small patch of skin that hadn't been burned. It had been deliberately cut away. Detectives immediately suspected a tattoo had once been there. Tattoos are deeply personal. They can tell you who someone is, where they've been, or what they love. And removing one suggested the killer knew exactly how it could lead police to the victim's identity. Investigators searched missing persons databases throughout Connecticut, looking for any young woman who might fit the profile. Nothing matched. But when they widened their search beyond the state line, a new lead appeared from Long Island, New York, about 80 miles away. Her name was Rebecca Coster, a 24-year-old nursing assistant who lived with her parents. She worked with adults who had developmental disabilities, a job that showed her caring nature. When she didn't show up for work one morning, her employer called her father, Larry Ross. He immediately reported her missing. Disappearing without a word was completely out of character for Rebecca. She had gone out the night before with friends. Around 3:30 a.m., she was seen alive and well, and then she vanished. Flyers soon went up across town with her photo, height, and weight, along with one unique detail, a large butterfly tattoo on her lower back. When Connecticut investigators learned about Rebecca's case, they couldn't ignore the similarities. Still, there was hesitation. Long Island was nearly 80 miles away. Could the body found burning in Connecticut really be hers? During the autopsy, the pathologist found the clue that answered that question. While most of the victim's body had been mutilated to hide her identity, her teeth were still intact. Unlike fingerprints, dental records can survive even intense heat. They're one of the most reliable tools for confirming who someone is. With the help of Long Island police, investigators obtained Rebecca's dental records. When the comparison came back, the match was absolute. The unidentified woman in Connecticut was indeed Rebecca Coster. Now came the hardest part, telling her family. Detectives went to the Coster home to deliver the devastating news. Rebecca's mother ran outside, screaming into the night, unable to believe that her daughter had been murdered. For the police, the case had taken on new urgency. Who would want to kill such a kind and spirited young woman, and why? They began retracing her final hours, starting with her closest circle. Everyone described Rebecca as warm, outgoing, and full of life. She was especially close to her mother, Barbara, and had even followed in her footsteps by becoming a nursing assistant. On the night she disappeared, Barbara had been working an overnight shift. She remembered her daughter laughing with her brother, teasing him for stealing her fries, before heading out with her best friend, Nicole, and a new boyfriend named Dan. It wasn't a serious relationship. They'd only recently started seeing each other. But in any missing person case, those closest to the victim are always questioned first. Nicole told police she'd gone home early, leaving Rebecca with Dan and a few other friends. Dan was soon brought in for questioning. He told detectives he'd walked Rebecca to her front door around 3:30 a.m. and watched her go inside safely. That, he claimed, was the last time he saw her. He said he cared deeply for Rebecca and would never hurt her. To test his honesty, investigators asked him to take a polygraph test. He agreed. The questions focused on whether he knew what had happened to her or where she might be. When the results came back, they showed signs of deception, but detectives weren't ready to draw conclusions. Polygraphs aren't always accurate, and despite the red flags, Dan continued to fully cooperate. His home was searched from top to bottom, yet nothing linked him to Rebecca's disappearance or death. For now, suspicion hung in the air, but no solid evidence pointed his way. Investigators kept digging, cross-checking every statement from that night. They compared Dan's version of events with those of the other friends who had been out with Rebecca. Every story matched perfectly. Every story the witnesses told matched perfectly. No contradictions, no clear lies. With nothing solid tying Dan to the crime, investigators had to broaden their search. They turned once more to the medical examiner, hoping the autopsy could narrow down the time Rebecca was killed. Toxicology tests came back clean, no trace of alcohol or drugs. That told the doctor something important. If Rebecca had been drinking earlier in the night, her body had already processed it by the time she died. In other words, she'd been alive for several hours after leaving the bar. The doctor estimated her death occurred roughly 4 hours later, around dawn, though he admitted it was only an approximation. Pinpointing time of death is never exact. Too many variables come into play. Even so, it gave detectives a valuable clue. If Rebecca was still alive after parting ways with Dan, who had she been with next? Her family decided to check her phone records online, hoping for any hint of activity. 2 calls stood out, both from the same unfamiliar number beginning with 617. One call came at 4:10 a.m. and lasted 15 minutes. The next came at 4:27, barely 20 seconds long. The timing was chilling. Whoever owned that phone was likely the last person to ever speak to Rebecca. For her mother, that realization was unbearable. Rebecca had always felt safe, trusting the world around her. But as her mother later said, some predators wear human faces. Detectives raced to trace the mysterious number. Every mobile phone leaves a trail, signals bouncing between cell towers that reveal movement. By analyzing tower data, they discovered the 617 phone was traveling west to east that morning, heading straight toward Rebecca's home. The first call was long, the second, much shorter, as if signaling that the caller had arrived. Investigators believed the person behind that phone was outside Rebecca's house when the final call was made. But the lead hit a wall. The 617 number wasn't registered to anyone. It was a prepaid burner phone, untraceable and anonymous. While police struggled to track that lead, the medical examiner continued his work. One question still lingered. Had Rebecca been alive when the fire started? He examined her lungs for soot, a clear indicator of weather. She had breathed smoke. There was none. She had already been dead before the flames were lit. The burns made it difficult to see surface wounds, so the doctor looked deeper. Inside her abdomen, he found a stab wound to the liver and a large amount of clotted blood, a fatal injury on its own. But there was more. Rebecca had 4 additional stab wounds to the neck. The damage from the fire made it hard to determine when those wounds were inflicted, but the doctor believed at least one occurred while she was still alive. A cut to a major vein can draw air into the bloodstream, creating what's known as an air embolism, a sudden rush of air to the heart that stops it instantly. To confirm his theory, he ordered X-rays. The images showed a distinct air and blood level inside the heart, undeniable proof. Rebecca had been stabbed in the neck while still alive, and the embolism had caused her heart to stop almost immediately. Combined with the stab to her liver, the conclusion was clear. She had been murdered through multiple stab wounds before her body was set on fire. With the cause of death officially ruled as homicide, detectives returned to the timeline. They went back to the last place Rebecca had been seen, the bar. There, they uncovered a vital piece of evidence, a full surveillance system that had recorded everything from that night. The surveillance footage from the bar gave investigators their first real lead. There was no doubt now, Rebecca had been there that night. The cameras showed her sitting slightly apart from her friends, while her boyfriend and others chatted nearby. Then, a man entered the frame. He didn't look like the typical late-night crowd. He was older, neatly dressed in a sweater vest, polite in appearance. But something about him felt off. His movements were confident, almost calculated. He approached Rebecca directly and started a conversation. For several minutes they sat together, talking and using their phones. At one point, the man even took her phone in his hand and appeared to type something in, possibly his own number. Detectives immediately went back to question Rebecca's friends again. One of them, Jennifer, now remembered the man clearly. He'd been persistent and made her uncomfortable, asking odd questions and refusing to take a hint. She described him as creepy, recalling how he had also taken her phone and entered his information himself under the name J. Brown. When computer crime specialists examined Jennifer's phone, the name appeared exactly as she'd described, and next to it was the same mysterious 617 number that had called Rebecca just before she disappeared. For detectives, this was the break they needed, a name, even if it was fake, linked directly to both the bar encounter and the final phone calls from that night. But before they could focus on tracking J. Brown, another discovery arrived from the Connecticut crime lab. The duct tape used to wrap Rebecca's body had been carefully examined, and against all odds, analysts managed to recover 2 thumbprints from the sticky side, an incredibly rare find given the fire damage. When the prints were run through the state database, the match came back within hours. They belonged to a man named Evans Ganthier. Now detectives had 2 names, J. Brown, the man seen with Rebecca, and Evans Ganthier, whose fingerprints were literally on the tape that bound her body. It didn't take long to realize they were the same person. J. Brown was an alias, and behind it was Evans Ganthier. As investigators dug into his background, a troubling picture emerged. He didn't have an extensive record, but what he did have was concerning: domestic disputes with his girlfriend, accusations of forcing her into prostitution, and a disturbing habit of photographing women inside his garage. Detectives showed Jennifer a photo lineup that included Ganthier's picture. She didn't hesitate. She pointed straight at him. He was the same man who had approached them at the bar and entered his number into her phone. With that confirmation, the hunt began. Surveillance teams tracked him to the Bronx, where his girlfriend lived. They spotted his SUV, the same vehicle he'd been ticketed in before, parked outside her building. The next day, they watched as Ganthier walked directly to it. The moment he opened the door, officers closed in. He was arrested without resistance. At headquarters, Ganthier agreed to let detectives search his home and vehicle, claiming he had nothing to hide. He denied any role in Rebecca's death, but police weren't convinced. When investigators entered his garage, what they found raised immediate suspicion. The space had recently been cleaned and repainted. Buckets of cleaning solution, rollers, brushes, cement cleaner, and fresh paint lined the walls. The floor looked scrubbed and sealed, as if someone had tried to erase whatever had once stained it. Still, there wasn't yet solid proof tying the scene to Rebecca. That changed when they examined his SUV. Red stains were discovered on the console, and in the narrow gap beside the driver's seat, a place where blood could pool but rarely be noticed. Forensic testing confirmed their worst fear: it was Rebecca's blood. Confronted with the evidence, Ganthier didn't confess. Instead, he began weaving an elaborate story. One investigators quickly realized was designed to hide the truth. He admitted meeting Rebecca at the bar and calling her afterward, claiming she had willingly come with him. He said she suffered a sudden medical emergency, foamed at the mouth, and became unsteady. According to his version, she tripped over dumbbells in his garage, struck her head, and began bleeding. He insisted he panicked, that he put her in his SUV and tried to drive her to a hospital. By his account, she died on the way, leaving him in shock. But from there, his story grew darker. He admitted to mutilating her body, cutting off her fingers and toes, carving away her tattoo. Actions, he said, meant to make her look like a missing person. He described wrapping her body, taking it across the Port Jefferson ferry to Connecticut, and setting it on fire after dousing it with gasoline. He acknowledged burning her remains, but insisted he never killed her. According to him, Rebecca's death had been an accident. Detectives were unconvinced. The sheer brutality of the mutilation and burning went far beyond panic. As seasoned investigators knew, when killers are caught, they often try to minimize their actions. For Ganthier, claiming Rebecca had fallen was an attempt to recast murder as a tragic mishap. Now, the case rested on science. If his story was to be believed, the evidence would bear it out. But science doesn't bend to stories, it reveals them. There was no skull fracture, no bleeding inside the brain, no trauma consistent with a fall. What the medical examiner did find were stab wounds. One to the liver that caused extensive internal bleeding, and multiple wounds to the neck. X-rays revealed an air embolism. In the heart, a fatal bubble of air forced into her bloodstream. Proof that Rebecca was alive when at least one of those wounds was inflicted. The findings dismantled Ganthier's defense. Rebecca hadn't died from an accident. She had been murdered. With that evidence, prosecutors charged him with second-degree murder. During the trial, Ganthier continued to deny responsibility, painting himself as a victim of circumstance. But the evidence told a different story. Blood in his car, fingerprints on the duct tape, and the autopsy results all pointed directly at him. His claim that Rebecca had never bled in the front seat was contradicted by the physical evidence. His story unraveled piece by piece. The trial dragged on for 4 weeks. Rebecca's mother attended every day, her grief visible, but her determination unshaken. She had vowed to see justice served for her daughter. The jury deliberated for just 5.5 hours before returning their verdict: guilty of murder. The courtroom filled with a quiet sense of relief. For the Coster family, it wasn't joy, it was closure. An acknowledgement that Rebecca's life had value, and that the man who destroyed it would never walk free again. The judge sentenced Evans Ganthier to 25 years to life, condemning not only the murder, but the cruel, calculated attempt to erase Rebecca's identity. For investigators and prosecutors, the case was a testament to persistence and forensic science. Without fingerprints, DNA, and the medical examiner's expertise, Rebecca might have remained a Jane Doe. Instead, her killer was brought to justice. For her family, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been delivered, but Rebecca was gone. As her mother said, conviction could not bring her back. Forgiveness was impossible. What remained was the comfort of knowing that no one else would suffer at Ganthier's hands, and that Rebecca's voice, silenced by violence, had finally been heard.